with the original coastal settlements, the sales of land along the northern shore of Queen's Road, there hadn't been any professional planners, there had been no professional land surveyors, and the person who sold them, a young man, he was 21 years old, taken off a boat and was told, prepare these things for sale, had sold, he was called Alexander Johnstons, he wasn't going to die until 1896 actually, and he sold the land, all the land along the seaward side of Queen's Road. And what he did was to say that the sale was a piece of land from this point to that point, this point to that point, and he didn't bother to say how far it extended seaward. And so all the lot holders took the view that they had the right to reclaim as much as they wanted in front of their lot, that the lot extended as far into the sea as they could push it. And the result was, within, that should be 1856 by the way, very, very quickly, within a decade, every one of the lots had reclaimed along the waterfront here. And the reclamations were at different heights, they were at different, they had different ends. You can see here lots of different points where they ended up in the sea, and every time there was a typhoon, the typhoon would catch in these nooks and cause all sorts of chaos. And the government in 1852 said it wanted to stop this, it wanted to build a new road along the waterfront and pass a law saying that the lots only had rights up to the new road and they couldn't carry on reclaiming any further. And the lot owners were absolutely infuriated, and the government managed to get this road built in one chai, but they didn't get it built here in Central until the 1870s. It took a very long time before they were able to force this common sense change on the lot owners. Another great serious problem with Johnston's plan is he really forgot to provide for public access to the sea. He only provided two narrow lanes, one here, one down here. One of them is Icehouse Street, and there's this one here, and a very narrow lane leading to the old ferry pier up here. Everything else was private. And again, Hong Kong has been a problem with this right the way through to the present day, which is the lack of decent access between Queen's Road and De Vere Road. De Vere Road is this one here. It's eventually going to be built as De Vere Road. How were they developed? Again, ignore the dotted lines, they're nothing to do. There was developments in Central have taken place over in a series of phases, and this is the first phase, the phase from the 1840s to the 1850s. Normally, most of these lots, in fact all of these lots in this area, were bought by the rich European merchant houses. So not Jardines, because they moved a long way away, but the other rich merchant houses built these lots here, and almost always they built in the same way. Along Queen's Road there would be a row of shops which they would rent out, and there would be access through the shops, either a lane or an archway, into an area at the back where they built a hong. Now these are hongs very similar to the hongs that these people had known in Canton before. Long, thin buildings, 2 or 3 stories high, of which the ground floor was a warehouse. Above the warehouse was a residential accommodation for the junior staff of the company, and on the top floor was usually a residence for the taipan, unless the taipan had a house up on the hill here. And this is why the big companies are still called hongs. Originally it meant a row, so these are the row buildings of the hongs. And you would go in and there would be an office here at this end. So you'd come off the street and there'd be an office, an accounting house, warehouses behind, and always at the sea end, a key, a private key where goods could be landed and dealt with before they entered the warehouse, and a private pier. So there were about 40 private piers along the waterfront, each serving these individual hongs. And some of these hongs would, or very often when they had a shipment of goods came in, they would be placed in the warehouse, but very often behind the office here was an open space which would be used for auctions. So the goods would come in, advertisements would be put out, and then the owner of the goods would auction them off to whoever came to buy. Now, there is no trace of this left in Hong Kong at all. This early development has entirely disappeared. By the 1880s, it had completely gone. Nothing left of it at all. And the reason for this is purely and simply that all these major European houses found that they could make an awful lot more money by developing these territories for Chinese businesses. And every one of these hongs was demolished and replaced with small Chinese shop houses for rent between about 1856 and about 1886. The whole lot was redeveloped for Chinese shop houses. Not for any reason other than that was the most profitable use of the site. Because the big European companies realized that they could move their warehouses way, way out down to Sai Ying Kun and Sek Tong Jai, and they'd be just as good as warehouses down there. They could move their offices up onto the mountainside of Queen's Road, and they would be just as good there. And they could use the land they had here and make a small fortune converting it into Chinese shop houses. The only one that survived for a longer period of time, survived to the end of the 19th century, was this one. This is the Peninsular and Oriental Shipping Company Hong. And they needed buildings where they could process passengers. This was the P&O pier. And a P&O liner would come in, would moor in the mid-water. The passengers would be carried by launches to here, and then they would pass through the P&O headquarters here. And this was a very elegant three-story building because most wealthy people coming to Hong Kong came through here, through this pier, and so they wanted to make a good impression. This was a three-story house with balconies. It was painted white, the balconies were painted black, and it was called the Teet Lung Dai Ha, the black balcony building. And it stayed there until the reclamation pushed the sea front further out. This is the original Central Market here. The present Central Market is the third one on the site. This area was used and left for market use because this is where those streams, this is the Peel Street, Graham Street area here, and the streams that ran down the hills here came to the sea here and left this ground too boggy and marshy for development. And so Johnston left this site for a market. You could see there was a need for a market, and since you couldn't build substantial structures on it anyway, he built a market of single-story stalls here. And there were two private piers for the market, and goods would be brought in from the mainland. Food would be brought in and unloaded here. This is what it looks like by 1881. The same area that we saw before. Completely given over to shop houses designed for the Chinese. Originally, the shop houses came to here. This is where the waterfront was in 1856. When the government eventually got De Vere Road built, they had to give the lot owners compensation, and that's what they got. They got these shop sites here, additional land on their lot, as to keep them quiet about the reclamation. So these were added when De Vere Road was built in the 1870s. They got that here. And those of you who've been here long enough will remember going through these archways into these narrow streets that ran down and out to another archway in the back here, and all the fascinating little shops that used to function here. This is where the P&O building had been, and this little lane was called Teet Hong Lane. Yeah. So you can see a marked change from a European to a Chinese perspective, but mostly the Brown landlords remained European. They did this redevelopment solely because it was the most profitable use of the site.